Welcome back, guys. This is part 8 of the Metasploit Mega Primer. In this video, we will look at post-exploitation with Metasploit. So before we actually go into post-exploitation, let's quickly look at the art of breaking into systems. Now, most of us are aware that this typically consists of a couple of phases. The first being information gathering about your victim, which could be using search engines, DNS, a couple of other places where you're trying to passively gather as much information as possible. The second stage could actually be scanning and enumeration. This is where you run a port scanner like Nmap, figure out which services are running, what is the version of the service, what is the operating system on the victim, and many other details. Then once you've figured all that out, you go ahead and decide how to break into the system using some vulnerability for which an exploit is available, or you code your own exploit. Finally, you break into the system, gain access. Depending on what you broke in as, which is the amount of privileges you have, you might want to escalate your privileges on the victim using local privilege escalation attacks. Then finally, you would go ahead and do whatever you planned for in the post-exploitation phase, which is you might want to just do a proof of concept of stealing some data. You might maybe want to clean up by deleting the logs, backdooring the system, put rootkits and whatnot, right? Then you might even choose to use the system as a pivot to break further into the network. So almost all of us are aware that these are the common steps. Now, here is the interesting thing. The real world is actually much more complicated. It is not as simple as the demonstrations which we've just looked at, right? Which is we figure out a victim, we go ahead, fire tools up, and almost immediately we've broken into the system. Well, here's an example. You could have firewalls, you could have a DMZ in between them. After the firewalls, you could actually have the whole core and distribution switches, which finally go into the endpoints where the users are connecting. You could have a web server farm. You may even have IDSs, IPSs, and whatnot, right? So the real world is very, very complicated. And this is where, as a lot of you have also requested, that some real world examples be taken. So I'm definitely planning to do that. And the whole idea is to move towards something called scenario-based hacking. What do I mean by that? Well, in the typical regular case, which is what most hacking tools and most hacking certifications look at, is basically there is an attacker and there is a victim directly accessible to them. The attacker uses many exploits and techniques using which he is able to compromise the system. However, this is a very simple scenario. But the important thing to note is that one should ideally start with this simple scenario and then add complications. For example, first we go ahead, break into this remote victim who probably has an unpatched computer. The next thing we do is we patch his computer and then check if it is possible to break in through client-side exploits or through social engineering, right? Then we might want to complicate it further by adding a firewall in front. This could be either or, basically a network-based firewall or even a host-based personal firewall. Then we could complicate it further by first having the firewall traffic go through various switches and routers internally, and also be scrutinized by IDSs and IPSs, and then finally going to the victim. So what I'm getting to is the way in which I'm planning the scenario-based hacking series is to first start with a very simple scenario, then to add complications, right? Because this would facilitate a systematic learning. It is very easy to actually start with a complicated scenario, but the whole question would be, you would have to deal with variations in that scenario. And that will only be possible if you know how to go ahead and compromise systems given various different scenarios, right? So to do justice to scenario-based hacking, well, I plan to start a whole new series on that once we finished Metasploit Mega Primer. And Metasploit will be one of the tools which I will be using to demonstrate various scenarios in which you can break into systems. So for the viewers, please be patient. I can assure you that each and everything you're learning here right now is going to help you when we actually get to complicated scenarios. So I've taken note and we will definitely do it. Personally, this is much more interesting to me because when you have complicated scenarios, it's more fun to talk about them, to draw an architecture and all that. Also, I'm planning to release VMware machines, which you can play using VM Player and look at the same scenarios on your own machines and try out the examples which we will do here. Okay, so all that is planned, but be patient, we'll get to that. Okay, post exploitation. Well, you've broken into a system. The whole question is, now what? Now, what I've seen is traditionally always more emphasis has been given to actually breaking in and exploiting the system. Post exploitation has always been underrated. Though you think about it, that is where the real price of the exploitation lies. Post exploitation also to some extent is very complicated. Why? There are multiple things you need to do, including clearing logs, turning off AVs and IDSs. You might want to go ahead and ensure you install backdoors and rootkits so that probably when you go in and out of the system, nobody can figure out that something is wrong. You may want to stealthily execute programs from time to time, read and modify confidential data and whatnot, right? So post-exploitation is when all the real fun begins. So what are the different phases of post-exploitation? Well, to be honest, there is no specific industry standard about the phases of post-exploitation. These are 6 different phases which I could think about. Phase 1 is understanding the victim better, which is knowing more about the system you've broken into. Privilege escalation is generally done when maybe you've broken in as a less privileged user and you want to gain system or something else. Third would be deleting logs and killing any monitoring software, including AVs and firewalls and whatnot. Fourth is actually collecting data, executing programs on the victim. Fifth is leaving behind backdoors and rootkits to ensure that you have unrestricted access to the victim. Finally, 6 is using the victim as a pivot to hack deeper into the network, right? So give or take, I think, very broadly, if I were to classify post-exploitation, these would be the different phases. We will take up each one of these phases and look at various things we can do with Metasploit. So let's take up phase 1, which is understanding the victim better. Okay, so what do we need to understand about the victim once we break in? A lot of questions. Who did we break in as? Is the current user who's probably logged into the machine, is he active? Are we running on a VM or a dedicated hardware? Network topology, processes, AVs, what is running, what is not, kind of programs, a lot of questions, right? So let's quickly go into the demonstration of what all we can do with Metasploit post-exploitation. So like always, in this case, we have our vulnerable Windows machine, right, which seems to have an IP conflict as of now. So this is the victim and this is the attacker machine running backtrack. Quickly set everything up. I'll just go ahead and exploit the remote system. Right, and we've got a Metasploit shell. So the first thing we need to do is actually figure out who we are. And if you remember the previous couple of videos, that is easily done using get UID. Now this is great because we are the system account and this actually gives us a huge amount of power and privileges on the remote system. The second thing is probably to understand a little bit more about the system using the sysinfo command. This gives us the computer name as well as the operating system it is running. So looks like this is running an ancient version of Windows XP. Now, as you can imagine, the first worry an attacker would have is whether the remote user, who's the owner of the system, is also logged on or not, right? So the way you can find what what the remote user is doing in many ways is using the idle time command. This actually tells you for how long the remote user who's logged in has been idle. In this case, it is 1 minute and 27 seconds, which is not much. Now, if this probably runs into a couple of hours, and maybe it is night time where the remote victim is, then maybe he's just locked his computer and left for the day or gone to sleep, which might give the attacker a lot of window to actually do other activities. One of the other important things to know is if the remote victim is running on actual hardware or within a VM, right? So this can be done by running a Metasploit script called check VM. So script works perfectly, and it says this is a Sun VirtualBox virtual machine. Now there are a couple of other commands also which we can run. One of the more interesting and ones of this is actually the get environment Metasploit script, right? So this gives us a lot of information about the directory structure, where the temp dir is, the processor architecture, and a couple of other interesting things. So basically what we are doing is slowly trying to understand the hardware, the software running on the system, what the user is doing, etc., etc. Now this gives us some understanding about the platform. In order to go ahead and figure out what all processes are running, we use the ps command. This has been covered previously, but from a post-exploitation perspective, this is very useful. Right, awesome. So this gives us a full list of the different processes running on the remote system currently. Now, one of the other things you might want to do is also have a look at the different IP addresses, etc., which are configured on the current system. So for that, you can go ahead and use the IP config command. This gives you the different interfaces. First one is loopback, not very interesting. The second one is the actual physical interface, which is bound to the IP address 1.2. Right? Along with this, we can actually hit the route command to figure out the different routes which have been configured on the remote victim. This might be interesting. For example, if there was another subnet which probably is not accessible to the attacker directly, but he may be able to access that subnet using the remote victim. We will take one example in when we will actually look at pivoting, right? So a couple of interesting things we've done. Now we look at some quick automation of various things we can do using the Metasploit, right? So here is an interesting command which says get application list. This will go ahead and get us the list of applications which are present on the remote system. So in this case, you will notice it's a very bare bone Windows system with just the web folders XP and the Visual Studio C++ 2008 installed application, right? In a more practical system where you had a lot of things running, you would find a large list of applications. You could use some of these applications to actually insert your backdoors. We will look at that in later videos. You can also use the get local subnets Metasploit script, and this will give you an understanding of the subnets. Almost the same thing which we could have figured out using the route command, right? We can also figure out the logged in users. I don't know why I forget the run prefix always, right? So this gives us current list of different users and their SIDs, etc. Now here is one interesting Metasploit script called scraper. So if you notice, there are a lot of informations which we are currently displaying, but there is a lot of other information which you would want to probably go ahead and collect and process offline. So the scraper script is the best option for this. Now this would go ahead and harvest a lot of system information, including network shares, registry hives, password hashes and whatnot. And it would store it on the attacker's local system by downloading the results. Right? So let's go ahead and run the scraper script. This might take a while to run. Now, one of the things which I'd like to mention is there is a small error here, in the sense this is not the exact directory location. Under logs, there is another directory called script, under which the scraper script is actually located. Right? So let's go ahead and wait for it to finish. So it's now currently downloading the entire registry. Seems to be one small error in going ahead and running one of the commands. No problem. Let's just wait for the output. Pause the video for a bit because I don't want the videos to be too long while we are waiting for data. Awesome. So the script completed after around a minute or two. Now it's downloaded practically everything in the registry. And as most of you know, the registry contains a lot of interesting information like product keys and whatnot, right, which one could investigate. Now, the place in which all this has been stored, depending on what you've configured, well, you have to go into the logs directory, then you have to go into the scripts directory, and then, depending on what you have, scraper and the IP address and the timestamp of when you collected all this information. So if you notice, a lot of information. Now hashes.txt is nothing but, oops, I should have changed directory. Right, hashes.txt contains the entire dump of all the hashes in the SAM file. Similarly, you have system info, which unfortunately did not yield anything because of the error. One of the things you could do is try running it once again if there is an error. What I've seen is a lot of times it might work on the rerun. You also have users.txt, which gives you an example of what users are there. User called hacker. Seems like someone broke in before me. User called Vivek and whatnot. Right? And then you actually have the registry dumps. Now you can use a software like Regedit or any other software to actually open these registry files and probably even run a couple of batch processing commands to mine various keys or to look at what all is there, right? So the point I'm getting to is a lot of valuable information is downloaded by scraper. Similarly, there is this tool called WinEnum, right, which enumerates a lot of interesting data on the remote machine, and this is once again going to store it in the same directory. Note, under logs there is a scripts directory under which WinEnum is storing all this information. We can go ahead and quickly run this command, right? So what it in turn does is runs all these commands and it is collecting the output. So the net command is very powerful, figuring out the different accounts available, the different users, the different shares. Then it is using, the WMIC to go ahead and run more further diagnostics on the different commands which are available, right? WMIC, for those who are not aware, is the Windows Management Instrumentation command. Now this actually allows you to check for various configurations and even at times set different configurations, right? So very powerful. Have a look at it as well. So all of this has gotten dumped. If we go back here and just go back one directory, two directories up, you'll notice now there's a new folder called WinEnum, right? And this contains this new directory where all the dumps from WinEnum have been stored. All the tokens which are available, program snapshot, okay, this for some reason didn't work, but we could find the programs just using the current running programs using PS and get applications to figure out what applications are there. Couple of repetitions though. You have hashterm.txt here. It does the exact same thing as the scraper script did. So what you could actually do is look at all the outputs of these programs and then go ahead and actually figure out what is interesting to you. Right, this is almost the sysinfo output. Now basically, depending on what you're trying to achieve, some or more of this information will be interesting to you, right? So I think one needs to figure out his own way of what information he wants to mine on the remote system and how he would like to use it, right? Another interesting place is actually the shares, because this would actually mean that some other people are also using these shares to maybe copy files, etc. Right? C drive / AV, which actually means this may contain AV software. We could probably go ahead and even figure out what is available there. One of the easiest ways is actually just get dropped into a shell and just actually figure out what is there in the AV directory, right? So this seems to have two softwares. One seems to be AVG free, the other is Avira antivirus. Great. Maybe we could even backdoor or add Trojans to these so that anybody downloading and installing remotely would definitely end up having a problem, right? Great. So there is one other interesting script I want to take you through, which is the prefetch tool. Now what happens is, on the Windows system, based on which commands are accessed more frequently, those are actually put into the prefetch folder, right? And this is where the information about the most frequently run programs by the user is available. And this is a treasure trove simply because you know what the computer is actively being used for. Also, later on, you will notice that whenever we want to do things like backdooring, the programs which are being frequently used would be an interesting place to begin with, right? So what this does is goes ahead and actually prints out the whole prefetch folder along with the different statistics. Here is the file name, this is the MD5 hash, this is the SHA-1, and this is the MAC, which is the modified accessed and creation time. The total number of runs gives you some estimate of how many times this has been run. Right, so too much of output, you can use the -h command to go ahead and distill it a little bit. So let's say I'm only interested in the top 3, right? And I'm not interested in the SHA-1 and MD5 checksums, right? So if you notice, logon.scr, command.exe, and then entos boot are the most commonly run programs on the remote system, right? Command.exe, well, this shows that probably the user does a lot of administrative tasks using the command prompt. Interesting. So which means we could go ahead and maybe backdoor command.exe. You could also go ahead and request the prefetch tool to do lookups for different software names. Right, so this will give us some more information. Let's wait for the output to be generated. Awesome. So if you notice, we basically have command.exe as the Windows command prompt, and a couple of other interesting information. For example, login.scr is basically being called an adware hijacker. Okay, so interesting. So basically you can try out a couple of other interesting commands which are available using the Metasploit scripts, but I think I've covered most of the important ones as far as gathering information about the remote system is concerned. Right, so let's go back to our presentation. So now we know the victim better, right? Now in the next video we will look at privilege escalation and deleting logs and killing monitoring software. Okay, well, that's all for this part. End of part 8. Uh, would request you all to please leave behind your comments. First of all, thanks a lot for all the encouraging comments. This is what really keeps me going. Last couple of days have been very hectic on a personal front, but I've still been trudging on to ensure that I can finish this mega primer in the next 1 or 2 weeks to a very advanced level as far as possible. So have a great day. Please leave your comments behind. Thank you.